of, there's a missing word here, but for the safety at sea, maybe, the Samothracian rights, the safety at sea, the Samothracian rights promised, was a social reality as well as a mythic metaphor. And this leads us to the game she will tell us about, Sailing with the Gods, that puts all of these elements into play in a way that we will learn about now. So Sandy, welcome.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to be here and with you in the fight. I'm really hoping that you guys are as successful as you possibly can be in this attempt to tell people what they actually need to know. So as John said, he and I have been friends for years, and it's been way too long since we had the chance to hang out. So today's paper introduces you to the project that is the outgrowth of my some 10 years looking at the mystery cult of the great gods of Samothrace. And my subtitle for today is Argonauts, Ancient Risks, and the Social Life of Sailors. In the end, one of the big questions coming out of this is how we can help ourselves reconstruct the social reality that constituted successful seafaring for people whose names we have but once on a busted up stone in the ancient world. In as much as it's been a lot of my life over the last 10 years, and it always sounds like fun, right? You say, we're gonna make a game. It's like, that sounds like fun. And then 10 years later, you realize you haven't slept in the last 9 years, and you say, wow, how much fun am I having? Making a game is a terrific amount of work. Why do it? And there's two really big avenues into that. One is there are obvious, fantastic educational outcomes, not, I would hasten to emphasize, this kind of Easter egg approach where you stick stuff from the ancient world into a game and then have students go looking for it like an Easter egg hunt. I've had more rewarding things with students participating in the development and the implementation and the illustration of the game than anything else. Students who have helped me collect data, who have done the illustrations you'll see today, who are now students at Kennesaw State University are doing mini game design for me, and students who do playthroughs and do critiques of the game. There's also something bigger about that. All of us who love mythology know that there's a big difference between myth and the literary canon. Myth is defined by being open-ended, polyformic, as well as polysemic. And as you know, if you like to play games, the idea is every time you play it, something different can happen. There's an open-ended quality to gameplay, a branching quality that really maps right onto the way that actually myth works as a social force. And there's also a particular fascination that's come more and more clear to me over the years. The thing about understanding a phenomenon like the mystery cult of the great gods of Samothrace is that the ancient world is full of stories. They were seen as people sailed by, they were planted there as people claimed the territory, and they were used as you greased the wheels of interaction with other people. So one of the things I love about this project is you get to put myths in space. And this is a lot of what I learned by working on Conan for so many years. So, and then there's the other side, which has to do with research outcomes. If you've heard of the idea of serious games, it's a simple but really powerful idea. The choices that we make when we are in a game world are serious reflections of the choices that we make as thinking, sentient, agentive human beings in the real world. So it is possible with a game like this to generate data that offers important comparative material for the kinds of analyses of epigraphic material that we have from the ancient world. I mean, this is a big and wonderful idea. All of you who know about inscriptions know that they're fantastic. They're literally words written in stone, and they're busted and they're scattered, and a lot of them are missing. And on Samothrace, a whole lot of them went into the lime kiln. So as tantalizingly written in stone as they are also absolutely shot full of holes. And that leaves us the chance, and in fact, kind of the gauntlet, to say, how do I responsibly provide comparative material to balance off the data I'm getting from the stones? There's also, as I've written about at some length, a really interesting combination of both structure and agency. I mean, games have rules. That's what defines them. And then you make choices based on those rules to get through them. A lot of the civic institutions that in a very practical way helped people be safe in maritime safety also had that combination of structure and then individual agency. So a gamification of the evidence that we have has a kind of natural quality. And then my last favorite thing is I ultimately have a 2-word hypothesis. Samothrace worked. It promised safety at sea, and I think it worked. Whenever I tell the classes that, they're on the floor laughing. But whenever I talk to the anthropologists, they say, go on. Of course it does. So the question is not does ritual work, but how it works. And that's what this research is really aiming for. So what I'm going to do tonight is first give you a quick tour through the academic framework of how I got here, the idea of rituals about safe sailing. And then from that comes this phenomenon that we have all these structures and no agency. And then in terms of the game, I'm going to show you how we made this world in the game, both the physical world and the social world, including hiring your crew, getting to know their stories, and setting your goals for the game, which is very simple. Get rich, get famous, and don't die. It's a very easy game in that regard. We're going to look at some of the things that I've been really fortunate to develop with these students at Kennesaw State who have been volunteering to work on the game. They've helped me develop pirate fights in which you're bargaining or fighting based on your social networks, storm sequences where you bargain with the gods through your ritual practices. The hardest sell, at the dock, you meet the grumpiest taxman in the world, but meeting the taxman is a chance to put your social networks into play. It's like a game called Taxman. It's not something you naturally assume is great. And then finally, what we've been working on this semester in the taverna, where you have both the chance to build your kleos, your fame, and explore how you can get the information about sites in the ancient Mediterranean flowing to you in the taverna, as in point of fact, they did in the ancient world. And this semester's games have been board games and insults, song contests, which John has helped with very much, and then buying food as you buy friends. So with that, let's go to Samothrace. This started with Samothrace, this island right up here, which is between 2 seas and 2 continents, and in the ancient world is between the Greeks, the Thracians, and the gods. It's also a place that's always been hovering between classics and anthropology. I got to Samothrace because I was studying some of the daimones that lived there, but the question that has come out of it has been far more intriguing than I could have imagined. To be a Greek is to set to sea, to travel, and that means to be a Greek is also to hate traveling. I'm sure you all remember Hesiod saying, I hate boats, I hate going to sea, it's the worst thing in the world. But it's not just that it's the storms. It's not just that there are anthropogenic problems that happen when you're at sea. The risks of sea were as much a result of pirates as they were of leaky ships or of storms. So that's one big idea. And there's the reality that the mystery cults of the ancient world, and I know you know these, at Eleusis has a really pragmatic economic focus, grain, agriculture. Dionysus, as well as all of the concerns about the other world, is also linked to another leg of the tripod of the Greek diet and the Greek economy. And so if you look at these other 2 mystery cults in terms of economic realities, Samothrace is really the 3rd leg of the tripod because it's the economic reality of assuring travel by sea. That was the Greek reality. The Greek landscape, as Archilochus so famously said, is bony like the backbone of an ass. There's never an accountable agricultural surplus. And the response is to go to sea in order to make sure that you can move things around. So Samothrace is looking at something that's fundamental to the Greek identity, as well as the Greek economy. And the ancient textual world gives us a lot of information about this. And what I've always loved about Samothrace, when you're looking at the texts on the site, it comes very early in our evidence that the Samothracian gods kept you safe at sea. And a lot of these indications are really, really funny. I mean, Aristophanes in the 5th century in Pax is joking about it. Theophrastus in the 4th century is making fun of it. Callimachus, the epigrammatist in the Palatine Anthology, makes fun of it. Again, in Lucilius makes fun of it. But the big thing is here, if it's a joke, it means that everybody knew it. Because if you have to explain a joke, it doesn't work. Already in the 5th century BC, this was familiar enough that Aristophanes, who was very, very funny, could make a joke about it and it worked. And this is important because our biggest architectural monuments on the island don't really come into play until hundreds of centuries later. So this idea was on the ground for a long time, before the cult became widely known. And then when you go to the site, you see all kinds of indications that there was a physical reality that confirmed to everybody walking around the site, everything you've seen is true. The Nike, who looms above the site and is the first thing you would have seen as you came up from the beach into the little valley where the site is located. She's standing on the prow of a ship, probably a Rhodian trihemiola, and that ship would have been as visible as her wings were visible, catching the wind that was blowing them back. The site is also the home for one of only 3 preserved neorions, these bizarre buildings that were built to hold an entire ship as a votive. It could have been a warship, it could have been a merchant ship, but it was a thank offering saying, since the gods have preserved me at sea, here's the ship they did it with. Diogenes, wonderfully cynical, said, you know, you go onto the site at Samothrace and there are heaps and heaps and heaps of these little votive pinakes, things like the size of a postcard made out of terracotta. And these are as much the lower end of the food chain as this is the higher end of the food chain. And on them would be thanks to the Samothracian gods for saving the person who gave it to them at sea. What Diogenes says is, well, you know, if the gods were better at their job, there'd be a lot more of those on the site than there are. So he was being sarcastic about it. When it came to that sea, Poseidon is not the god of Samothrace, but there are bundles and bundles of different kinds of gods associated with the sea who come crowding onto the site. Herodotus talked about Pataiki, these little ithyphallic male figures on the prows of Phoenician warships. They look a lot like Bes in some of the terracottas identified as Pataiki. Herodotus in the 5th century said, you know, the Samothracian gods, they look just like Pataiki. Then you've got the idea that the pumpelos, this fish that would sail in front of ships to guide them on their way, was dedicated to the gods of Samothrace. The idea that the Dioskyroi, the 2 sons of Zeus, specifically in the form of the lightning that appears over ships in the darkest storm to take them to shore, that is their manifestation as Samothracian gods. And so that is also known as Saint Elmo's fire, and the Elmo in Saint Elmo is said to come from Helena, who is the sister of the Dioskyroi, so the whole family tree gets bundled into it. And one of my favorites, Leucothea, whom you see here in this terrific old illustration, when she rises up from the waves to help Odysseus, according to some early Roman commentators on the Odyssey and the Iliad, she gave Odysseus a sash from the Samothracian mysteries as a kind of set of water wings to bring him to shore. So nymphs, Dioskyroi, Phoenician divinities, random fish, everybody's helping out. And there may have even been a little bit of magic. One of the things that first caught my attention on Samothrace is this idea that initiates were given a magnetized iron ring at the point of initiation. Here's one of about 22 rings that have been preserved from the site. We know that they're magnetized because of Lucretius says, I've seen Samothracian iron rings dance and iron filings go mad in bronze basins when the magnet stone is placed underneath it. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the extent to which that helps them map onto the idea of a magical gem. You know that in the ancient magical world, analogy and metaphor is powerful. And with the uses of magnets in love magic, you see it's their power to draw things that's used. So magnets show up in love magic a lot because you can draw your beloved to you. Similarly, the idea that with a magnetic stone, you could be drawn through the waves safely on your ship would put these magnetic rings of Samothrace in the same category as things like this little gem from Epidaura Limera, where you see a helpful sea creature floating along, guiding the ship. You see the same kind of helpful sea creature here on a Sidonian coin. So they're among the daimones on Samothrace, there are the Idaean dactyloi who are associated with iron and also are very strong magical protectors of those for whom they care. So it's a big basket full of gods, all of whom say it's about maritime safety. We're going to keep you safe. When it gets to inscriptions, it gets really interesting too. People clearly bought this. We have 4 different sets of inscriptions in which people actually say those gods intervened and kept me safe at sea. One is the 1st century admiral Diopethes of Rhodes. Naturally, you have somebody from Rhodes, right? They're all about maritime dominance. And he says, it's the Samothracian gods who saved my trireme off the coast of Libya. But the other three in Koptos and in Fasilar, look where Fasilar is, and in Apamea Kibotos, I mean, look where that is, places so far from the sea that you have to almost think about Odysseus putting that oar on his shoulder and trekking inland until he gets to the point where people say, guy, what's with the winnowing fan on your shoulder? What's that all about? So far from the sea, but they thank the Samothracian gods for saving them. So it's a widespread idea. And keeping with the idea of inscriptions, here's where we can go from the mystic promise to some practical reality. One of the richest kinds of inscriptions we have on Samothrace are things like this, which are these blocks announcing the bestowal of both theoria and proxenia to people who came from the island. Now, theoria is the status of being an ambassador from your hometown to the annual festival on the island of Samothrace. The festivals at Samothrace were not the same as initiations, but they were a gigantic conference. And at those festivals, theoria was added to something called proxenia. And those of you who are in love with Homer will see Xenia in there, right? Proxenia first appears in our texts as early as the 5th century BC, but really ticks up in the Hellenistic period. A proxenos has it as his job to look after, like a good guest friend, the representatives from the town that grants him that privilege when they're at his house, when in his hometown. So proxenia is usually granted because somebody from another town has always taken care of the people of Samothrace. He's given them grain in times of difficulty. He has abstained from piracy. When somebody's given proxenia, they get a lot of things that look like it's specifically aimed at safety at sea. And people from Max Weber onward have said, you know, proxenia existed to tamp down the sociogenic risks of maritime travel. A person who comes to Samothrace and is made a proxenos, to him Samothrace says, no more port taxes and fees for you. That's a big deal, because keeping safe at sea means you also need to be able to repair your ship and hire men and get water and buy food when you're in port. Giving you a financial leg up is a big step in pragmatic maritime safety. They also get access to the city council, which ordinarily a random stranger couldn't do. But it means that, gosh, if I am passing by Samothrace, I'll put it into business because I can have straight access to the people who are putting the world together there. And they give them ace plume and ek plume sailing in and sailing out in times of war, in times of peace, and in pursuit of business. So no fees, no restrictions on the harbor use, and finally, one of the best ones, Acilia. And the Venerable John Davies himself has proposed, you know, the thing about Acilia, which means freedom from seizure, that undercut the principle of ancient piracy. Piracy was the FedEx of the ancient Mediterranean world. If you want it overnight, you call on a pirate, right? He can board your ship, take your stuff and say, oh, we're doing this because, you know, somebody in your city once offended somebody in my city and I don't have any legal representation in your city. With Acilia, you can't grab other people's stuff. Acilia is what drove the pirate trade. So think about it. When Samothrace is granting Acilia to people, they're basically saying, all right, we're not going to practice piracy on you. We're not going to grab the stuff off your ship. But all of these things really grease the wheels of maritime collaboration and cooperation between cities. Now, offered from Samothrace, it's just good between you and Samothrace. But the people who gathered there for the festivals, these were the movers and shakers of the ancient Mediterranean city-states. People collected theoria and proxenia like charms on a charm bracelet. It was part of this Hellenistic clamoring up the food chain of recognition and internationalism. I want you to think for a minute what these festivals are like. Here's one of my favorite inscriptions. So this is a Theros Proxenos inscription, maybe from the 2nd century BC. A lot of these are dated just on letter form. And you can see it's a phone book, which is like really exciting. It's the city name, Cyzicus, Halicarnassus, Chios, Eresos. And then it's Hierocles, son of Demetrio, Hierocles, son of Menestratu. It's names and patronymics. These people don't show up anywhere else in the Greek historical record or in the epigraphic record, but these guys were the people who had stories to tell and who went to festivals like this. They had FaceTime under the aegis of the gods, whose job it was to promote maritime safety. What happened at those festivals? Deals are struck. If you were a Greek doing businessman doing business far, far away, you don't often see the people you're interacting with. And of course, there's no phone, there's no fax, there's a very rudimentary letter system. These festivals were where business happened. And by combining the coming together at a festival over which the gods were presiding with the distribution of this sacred grant of proximia, you are helping assure that these people are going to be collaborating, not competing, that they're not going to be practicing predatory extraction on each other. And also there's information flow. Jamie Morton, who's written one of the most impressively clear books about maritime safety in the ancient world, says it best. That which kept the sea as safe as possible was the clear flow of information. Who's come into power over here? What are the conditions in that harbor? What's going on? The information flow that comes out of these festivals helps hold the world together. So these suggest the practical means, the human interactive means, by which safety at sea was a real thing coming out of Samothrace. Oh, and then there's more. So we have inscriptions in cities away from Samothrace that account that how koina, these clubs, which again were very much a kind of place for social interaction and information sharing and collaboration, clubs organized under the aegis of the gods, priesthoods under the aegis of the gods, shrines for the gods were scattered up and down the Asia Minor coast. And with all of this, you have the idea of human collaborative interactions under the aegis of these gods. And the question becomes, if this is ensuring information flow and collaboration, how can I see how it actually worked, right? I can see all these institutions. I can see clubs, I can see priesthoods, I can see initiations, I can see theria, I can see proxenia. If you put it in a nutshell, you can conceptualize this as a moral economy of the ancient maritime world. It literally lowers the cost of transactions to be tied with people like this. Information flow has increased. People agree not to practice piracy. And they also, cities give up the substantial income of those harbor fees. That suggests this is really, this kind of information flow and free movement of people is really a big deal. And it's justified by the idea that you have higher net revenues. This is so contemporary, right? The idea if you do away with taxes, some people will do more business with you. This is the principle going on there. And it provides what from an anthropological perspective is so exciting, this natural bridge between the civic and the mystic. And thanks to the miracle of digital technologies, we can use social network analysis to gauge the relational patterns. I mean, who got together with whom and how often on the island. And then we can use geographic information systems to put this into Cartesian space. And here, in a quick nutshell, is some of where this gets us. So I'll leave out all the mind-bending fun of making spreadsheets for a couple of years in a row with some really good friends and some really good supporters. A couple of things you can see from the social network analysis. If you just look at it in geospace, and geospace over here and in social space over here, you can see that there are definite patterns, clusters of people who meet on the island with each other more than they do with other people. And these are fairly tightly bound communities. They met on the island more than once at the same time. A couple of things that just at a glance at this you can see, this encourages us, wow, we should take a close look at the island of Thasos and see how connected they were to the Samothracian network, because they connect the blue and the purple and the brown network together. And then also Aigai, bizarrely, here in Cilicia, they are the link between this big blue clump and the southern part of this whole cluster and all these folks up here. But there's another thing you see over here. Network proximity is not coincident with geospatial proximity. I mean, this is covering a lot of space for the green cluster. And look at these outliers for the blue. This is really appealing because in anthropological terms, the idea that you're really interested in forming formal ties with people farther away, that suggests a network that's oriented towards information sharing. I don't need to share information with my neighbor. I can just stick my ear over the fence. But if I'm living in Arsinoe and I want to be doing business with people up in Phasos and Stibera, Samothrace looks like a place where all that comes together and I find out the shape of the world. So there's a lot of tantalizing possibilities there. But as I said earlier, this is all structure. You know what we have absolutely none of? We have absolutely no stories of how people actually exercised their benefits from Samothrace in real time. We have them thanking the gods, but nobody says, so I took my Samothracian proxenea and this is what it got me. And that's where the idea of gamification comes in. Games are agency rich because you all in playing the games are making real choices in real time. And a couple of the nice outcomes of this game is, as you can see from this previous slide, this is a game with a ridiculously big geospatial extent. I am so jealous of the people who make archeo games about a single site. It's like, damn, you're going to count for everything, but we've got hundreds of miles to cover. But that's appropriate because the promise is about moving through space. And so we need to put ourselves and put our actors in those spaces around the ancient Greek world. And the promise of the great gods of Samothrace, which Diogenes got so snarky about, here's the thing. If a mystery cult promises you a happy afterlife, nobody can ever come back and say, well, that didn't work because you didn't know. With Samothrace, there's a real world test of it, right? I mean, you have those inscriptions saying it worked. My ship didn't go down. And this is another thing that's come so clear to me in the last couple of years. It's sailing with the gods, but you're not spending your time on Samothrace. This is where the gods actually are in the Greek world. In the Greek world, the gods are woven into the civic landscapes. They're woven into the kinds of interactions you have with other people. They're woven into the ritual choices you make. You can think of it as a kind of distributed model of religion. It's religion as saturated throughout the living life space of someone's experience. And the idea too that you realize Samothrace, it was probably, your initiation was a once in a lifetime experience. If you went to the festivals, you probably went every couple of years. But you would use Samothrace if it's really being useful to you a dozen times in a year out there in the real world. That kind of normalizing the Samothracian promise, that's good anthropology. There's been a tendency with Samothrace because it's such a crazily beautiful archaeological site and it's such an unusual mystic promise to make it kind of a hotbox saying, wow, how weird is that? That's not good anthropology. Anthropology looks for patterns. And part of what I love about this project is it puts Samothrace in the patterns of acting and sailing and interacting like a Greek. Now, games need stories, and we chose the Argonautica for a couple of really natural reasons. One is, according to legend, they were themselves initiates, either the entire crew or Orpheus, depending on which Argonautica you read. But as you also probably know from your classes, supposedly the Argo was the very first ship. And that has this paradigmatic quality by which what happens with the Argo could happen with every ship and kind of should happen with every ship, right? I mean, this is the way that Odysseus's travel works, right? When Odysseus sails to the west, he becomes the proto-colonial, and everybody who sails after him is following Odysseus's footsteps. The Argonauts are taking that first trek into the Black Sea. And that's really the route on which Samothrace is situated, the way that the currents and the winds and the sailing seasons work. Samothrace is one of the most natural stops when you're heading up into the Black Sea. There's even this wonderful Samothracian anticyclone. I should have put this slide in here that kind of zips you around Samothrace when you exit from the Bosporus. So it's on those sea lanes. And there's also the fact that, you know, Samothrace as a cult lasts for 1,000 years, but the high point of its celebration is definitely the Hellenistic. The Ptolemies were on this cult like a duck on a June bug. They absolutely loved it. And it is for the Ptolemies that the canonical version of this story was produced. So there were a lot of natural reasons to take our story there. And as I said earlier, you're Jason. That's your job. I apologize for the lack of gender choices. In the long term, I would love to be able to make this a multiplayer game, and I would love for people to be able to play the role of Queen Tuta, the pirate queen, which will be a lot more fun. But anyway, you are Jason. And like every Greek hero, you want to get famous. Towards that end, you want to get rich. And also towards that end, you don't want to die. I have learned how easy it is to die playing this game because you die really fast if you don't have enough water on your ship. You want to move up, you use clout rather than chaos to make it a little more user-friendly. And there's a cloudometer on the ship. And it goes all the way from goatherd to god. You start out as Jason the goatherd. And you can move your cloudometer up first by managing the biological imperatives of your crew. If they don't get water, they will die. When we had the first build of the game, the ship kept going slower and slower and slower, and then everybody was dead because we didn't give them enough water. I had never thought about it, but having water for your crew was key. You also move your clout up by building monuments to yourself. And that's one of the options you have when you're in port, if you have enough money for that. And the idea that the money is there to monumentalize yourself and help turn yourself into something bigger is there. And the way you're going to get wealthy is trading along the route. You can also get clout by beating pirates or by managing to survive storms, or as you'll see in these most recent iterations, by doing well in the taverna. But this is where the game starts. You're a goatherd, your fortunes are about to change, things are looking up. You now on a teeny tiny ship that's modeled after the Chironia wreck. You have 5 crew members, but you need the money to hire more crew members to get a proper trireme. So away we go. In terms of building the world, I had an amazing game designer who was on this for the first couple of years, and I now have an amazing game designer who's working with me now. We use Pleiades, and the topography of our islands and our sites is accurate to about 1 kilometer's worth. The sea's still a little low, we need to bring the water up, but the topography is amazing. What I also loved about my first programmer is he got really excited about axial precession, and he modified the sky, taking account of axial precession between the 2nd century BC and now, so that the sky and the constellations that you see are where they would have been based on where you are in the water for the 2nd century BC. And then in terms of having your crew die off for lack of food and water, the biological needs were estimated based on NASA data for what astronauts needed to survive in space. We also, in terms of the degree to which trade is a part of this, we do have a significant trading menu when you get into port. If any of you have taken a look at the game, you'll see that. But it was important that you not be able to buy everything everywhere. So Dr. Mundi and I, Joanna Mundi, went through a lot of atlases about what's where in the ancient Mediterranean world. And we broke down where you can get copper, tin, wine, all those things. I mean, water you can get at any port, but the kinds of higher value trading goods are more sparsely scattered. That's how we made the physical world. Making the social world, putting the meat on the bones of social interaction, you get to pick your crew. And this is where you start out. And every crew member you pick has a little bit of a biography, and also an indication when you look at it, when you click on it and look at it more closely, of where they came from and what that place's social networks are. This is an important idea. Everybody you hire brings with him, as it were, his iPhone full of contacts, and that's going to be relevant in terms of how he interacts in the ancient world. We had the Argonauts as some of these folks. Other people come from one inscription block on Samothrace, and then we needed to fill in others, the other proxenic networks in the world, because in a nutshell, Proxenea works because it wasn't just Samothrace handing it out. Many, many, many city-states really traded in this as a way of tying themselves together. And every single person in the game comes from a specific place, a historical city, and brings those proxenic networks with him. So here's the horrible spaghetti graph of all of the proxenic networks in our game. We took a lot of our information from a really terrific 2015 book by Will Mack, Proxenia and Polis. This beautiful visual gives you a sense of where places that had tons and tons and tons of proxenia grants were located. The island of Delos is really, really big. Samothrace is fairly significant for an island of its size and specialization. But over here in Aetolia, mainland Crete, the Peloponnese, this is how the Greek world, it's holding itself together. Now, when you hire your people, thanks to another set of Kennesaw students, we do have sketches for a lot of them, and you get that biography. These sketches, we needed headshots that gave people a firm sense of who they were, and this meant a lot of body tattoos, a lot of face tattoos, neck tattoos to identify who people were. This is Tiphys. He never sleeps, so he's got red eyes. He's hallucinating constellations. But part of the value of digging in and giving you a sense of the narrative behind this is those dots on the social network chart don't give you the chance to think about actual human beings interacting. And so putting the story in place meant that we really needed to do this. These are some examples of what happens now. When you are putting into port, a pop-up shows up and lets you know who of your crew has some proximia connections there. So you'll know when you're pulling into port who's going to be helping you out. And here on the PowerPoint, I've given you a few examples of, some storylines came from characters we had from the Argonautica, so that was great. Others I had to make up. So this person who showed up on a Samothracian inscription, he was from Mytilene, and so I give a brief narrative about Mytilene and the history of the place. Or this one from Thera, we had to have someone from Thera since Thera networks are important, so we made up a person from there. But I'm pointing this out to you because one of the things about this game is everything in the game is real. I mean, I made up the details on Kalipos, but he's a real person and these are real details about the historical place. That goes a long way towards the historical value of the whole thing. Here's just one quick, oops, see if I can get this to play. This is what it used to look like. This is an earlier build of the game when you set out. As you can see, you move by clicking and moving away. Notice that you don't have a map. This is an accuracy when it comes to the ancient Greek world, but it means that you really have to get information about where you're going to sail from people that you hire. And this is the old, that was fast. The old version of the pirates was, people are about to attack you. Whoops, you died. So one thing we wanted to do in the last couple of years was making the pirate fights a little bit more interactive and giving them the chance to be something in which the importance of the proximia networks was something you experienced. So as you may know, there were different kinds of pirates in the ancient Mediterranean, and so we chose to focus on Aetolian, Illyrian, Cretan, and Etruscan pirates. I went through the Greek lexicon of personal names to choose appropriate pirate names for each of these places and made a biography for each of them. When pirates ships show up on the horizon now, you can click on them and see who exactly is on board and what all their stories are. And then we have some Kennesaw students who've done some nice illustrations of the various pirate types for us. What happens now with the pirate attack, which is a little bit more interactive, is you get a pop-up and you have, there's the pirates, there's a speedy ship, and we hear about the horrible things pirates do in the ancient world. And then you have choices. If you're lucky, someone on board your ship recognizes the pirates because they are from the same region they are. Someone from Aetolia will know about the Aetolian pirates, and they may well have a shared proximia connection. If that's the case, they may do better to negotiate with them because of that principle of proximia, that you abstain from hostilities with each other if your cities are bound by those kinds of agreements. You can try to run away. You're going to lose a lot of clout by running away, but you lose less by running away than by getting killed. You could gain a fair amount from negotiating successfully, but you can also gain by fighting and winning. And without exception, people tend to prefer to fight when they're playing the game. So as the captain, you get your men set for combat and you drag and drop your crew members from the bottom of the screen into the slots, which you'll see in the next slide. And what you're doing here is look at each of those biographies of the people you've hired and whether they're called a seer or a helmsman or a warrior or a merchant or a businessman, and you try to match the strengths across the divide. So all of a sudden, the specific people you've hired for your ship become really, really important. And then we added flavor texts. One of the things my programmer was telling me is, Sandy, when you talk about this ancient world, I can see how much you love it, but I'm not getting it from the game. So a lot of the work of the last year has been making these flavor texts, which connect you emotionally and imaginatively to what's going on, part of the game. So here it is. Here are a bunch of Cretan pirates, and here are various crew members you have to choose from, and you would click on the information for each of these and see who does what, and it'll be a one-to-one fight, man to man. So you line them up based on your best choices, and you click the fight button, and you did pretty well. You lost 3 men, but they lost more. Some examples of the results of the pirate fight is, great, you won. And this is a typo, it should be you beat them, not you beat them. And your clout's gone up by 5. And then you get a nice bit about red blood and gnashing teeth and things from the Odyssey, a little bit of gore. Or maybe you've lost. And life is going to be really embarrassing. You're going to be very much reduced in clout. And here's a depressing quotation suggesting just how much you look death in the face. So that's one improvement on the pirate fight. We've also really worked a lot on the storms. And this was a chance to bring the gods and negotiation with the gods in terms of rituals into the game. So we just introduced briefly, you know, gods make storms for a lot of reasons. And say, did you hire a seer last time you were in port? Because the thing is, if you've hired a seer, he's your ritual specialist, and that gets you into a branch of narrative where he can tell you exactly what you need to do to get that god happy, and there's a good chance that your ritual will calm the god down. If he calms the god down, then you'll be able to negotiate your way out of the rocks and the cracking wind and the waves in the sea and the resounding surf. So, if you don't have a seer, let's try somebody we know, and they bring out Iphicles, who has some astrolabe. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of possibilities for different routes through the ritual. In this case, I'm showing you, he casts the astrolabe, they get the number 5, and says, so we need to offer 5 things to the gods. And then someone says, ooh, I know about Artemis and how she keeps people safe at sea. And let's offer this song. And look, she's asking for all kinds of specific things. Well, I can perform the ritual or reject the ritual, but I also might want to know, well, there's a little problem. You don't really have the livestock, that is to say the offerings that she wanted for this. You can offer the drachma that she's looking for. So you can click and see, what's the chance that this ritual is going to work, or should I try something else? And then in the end, you go ahead and try the ritual, and maybe it worked. The ritual is a complete success, the storms calm down, and you can avoid a watery death. These are rocks and these are clouds. One of my game designers figured out clouds and rocks are really hard to draw, but here's your little ship. And if you've had a successful ritual, the arrow will show up and tell you how to get out of there. And also you've got a little increase in cloud. You can perform the ritual, and as you saw, there was 22% chance of it working, and you can lose cloud. So that's not good. Maybe you've escaped the storm and it's time for you to go make a ritual offering. And all of this is bringing the people playing the game into the reality that, you know, the gods are there on the ship, in the storm, on the beach. Next time I might want to hire a seer. Next time I might want to bring along a random goat to sacrifice in case I need to take care of a god who wants to sacrifice at sea. It helps reshape how people calculate what they need to buy before they leave port. And that's all part of a big arc that we're looking at in the game, which is, can we help people start to think about the choices they make in a way that's more analogous to how an actual Greek traveler would think about what they need for moving through the world successfully. And then in terms of flavor texts, we suggest, you know, a nice offering would be good. Why don't you celebrate Aphrodite as the goddess of good sailing and as the goddess of the gentle west wind? Here's an inscription you can set up for her. And here's another example where you can set up something for Nereus. So, so the storms give us a lot of chance to help people think about the gods in places away from a sanctuary. This is what we were working on last summer, the tax game, which is a really hard sell, I have to tell you. But it is significant because in terms of helping people, again, reshape their minds about what they think about the social realities of maritime safety. When you get into port, this is the guy. His name is Telones, which means taxman. This is you, Jason. You're very young and handsome and muscular. You have 2 different sets of clothing, and we chose this one for the image. If you can use and leverage the social networks of people on board your ship, you get to save money on taxes. But in terms of the accuracy, we went to great extent to get as much accurate detail as we could here together. It starts out and you meet the Telones, and somehow as we programmed this, we began to realize that since it's a taxman, he has to always be in a bad mood. So the Telones greets you with a bunch of insults. You're a useless bunch of windbags, you're a dogfly, you're a bunch of pretty sailors. We have dozens and dozens of possibilities. And again, in terms of the game itself, random choices out of those will pop up every different time you come into port. So you're not going to see the same thing happening again and again. The various moods, a wonderful student who was working as an illustrator this summer gave us different moods based on his face, whether he's bragging about himself or whether he's sneering at you. He may be in a patriotic, superstitious, boastful, a flattering mood. These texts have been taken from Theophrastus's Characteres, and we modify them to be suitable length for the game. But again, it goes a long ways towards giving a sense of really engaging and being in that poetic world that all of us who are gathered in, I kind of fell in love with in the first place. So after the initial insults and the back and forth, then there's Jason's first question. I give you this because before we got the Telones, we just did a substitute and put an emoticon on Jason's interlocutor with a signpost saying, not Jason, this is the Telones in a bad mood. So the Telones says, I'm the first and the last face you'll see here. You can call me taxman. And Jason wants to know, what kind of port have I come to? And then he goes, again, a random text will pop up. We've got about 14 options that are drawn from an awareness of how Greek sailors like Odysseus may find themselves in port and say, oh my God, where am I? I've never been here before. Who are these people? Are they cannibals? Are they Ethiopians? I hope they're Ethiopians. They're fun people. And the Portmaster tells him where he is. And then Jason says, what are the networks like in this city? And the Telones gives either level 1, level 2, level 3. But for each one, he gives you an appropriately poetic expression of, we make Zeus look like a hermit, or, we're like apples to the tree as far as, not really big networks, or it's like the hair on a bald man's head, we got nothing. But they established the idea that the first thing you did coming into port was to find out, okay, does anybody on my ship have someone to contact here? And you would have already had that pop-up indicating whether or not that's the case, but this makes the pop-up something that you actually experience during gameplay. And then Jason says, oh, so that's your network. Well, let me tell you about how networked we are. And then he can either be super connected, level 1, with at least 2 network connections between himself and a crew member and the city. And then he may say something triumphant like this, as the islands of the sea dance around Delos, so do our allies make us. Level 2, there's 1 network in common, or level 3, it's bad news. But you've set that up, and then what's going to happen is the Telones didn't want you to be in network, because if you're in network, he gets less money. And so you have a tussle back and forth with him, and he may say, well, can you prove it? And you have to provide some kind of proof, either a personal diploma, or there's a whitened board with lettering on it in the city of Sanis, announcing the city's proximia networks, a stone stele, or just go to the city archives, go look for a witness, go to the local traders. But in terms of, again, the pragmatics of the game, people are really experiencing, wow, I may or may not have used those networks to fight the pirates, but I'm really trying to use them to get along in this town. And then the haggle starts about, well, what kinds of benefits does that network give you? And that can be a relief from everything, a relief for things of personal use, well, your father got that relief, or your father and everybody you ever knew got that. So again, the variability of this comes out, and hopefully people are learning something. And then in the end, Jason has to threaten the Portmaster, listen, give us the gosh darn break. And he may curse him. We were very happy to make up a curse specifically for the Portmaster. He can threaten him with a fine. He can threaten him with a hearing before the council. And these are all coming from historical examples but it's helping people in a not too heavy way experience how complicated it is just to enter a town, and experience how many ways you can really lose out a lot. And then you pay your taxes to enter the city, and the number of taxes that you go back and forth with about the telones, it's almost hilarious. I mean, because there's one that is just the port tax, then there's the tax for what you intend to do in the town, a tax if they're repairing the local god's temple, a tax if they're on a good thoroughfare, a tax if they don't like foreigners, a tax if they look too wealthy, all these different things. But finally, then you get into the town and you get into the taverna. Got, as I said, 3 major things we've done just recently. One is the board games, where there's a lot of fun insults going back and forth. The song contest, where John's work has come in so brilliantly. And then buying food and buying friends so you can get the information flow. So in the taverna, we were really intrigued by the idea that here we could put in the game a mini game, which is a game that you would have actually played in the ancient world to pass the time in a taverna, to get to know the locals, to sit and talk with people. If you win at this game, it's a way to have your clout go up. So that maps nicely onto the whole purpose of the game itself. The term pesoi or peteia was just used for board games, and they were a kind of game with some order, but there was an idea that fate was at work, not just your skills. There's a little bit of diciness about, you know, can a god help me? How regularized is this? And if you look closely throughout the Greek world, you'll see people engaging in these. You may remember that when you enter the palace of Odysseus, the suitors were hanging out and playing pesoi in front of the doors when they were waiting for their meal to be cooked. The rules on any of these games are debated and they're hard to recover. Pesoi specifically has a comment in Pollux suggesting that the board is called the polis, and each of the pieces is a dog. And there's 2 different colors of the pieces. And the idea is that you want to capture the other colored piece by surrounding it with 2 pieces of the same color. So whether you call it polis or peteia, it seems to be kind of a battle game. And you've got about 30 pieces on each side, and every piece has equal status. It's not like chess, it's more like checkers. But you want to keep your enemy from maintaining a massed formation, and you kind of want to scatter his forces, and if you're isolated, you're putting your team at risk. So this is what our Kinosa's in the semester come up with for pesoi. And again, our interest in putting flavor texts in arose in the possibility of really insulting the people you're playing with. And I want you guys to know this game is appropriate for 5th graders, but that meant leaving out a lot of insults in the ancient Greek world, because there's a lot of insults that are not appropriate for 5th graders. So you can throw insults like, you're a convict, you're crowbait, you're a defiled person, you're an eater of leftovers, all these things as you're playing with your opponent. And also you can brag. And we found some great lines for the braggart from Aristophanes' Knights saying, I'm the champion player. Even after I eat an ox tripe and a sow's belly and all the gravy that goes with it, I'll beat you greasy and slobbering in this board game. So this is fun. And you can see here too, at this point, you are a disembodied arm, and you're male and you're muscular and you're kind of hairy and you're into leather, but it's fine. It's what we've got. We're going with it. And here's just a few other of the insults that I just loved. I mean, if I don't win this game, may I be cooked in a stew, grated on the table with the cheese, and then made into a hash and pass the hook through my guts. It's a nice little bit of lightness. We decided also to re-present another game. Some of you may have seen this. This is a gaming board that was found at the royal tombs of Ur. And you can see that it's got what seem to be little tower pieces, and also the black pieces, the white pieces. There are this was like a really well-known game, which is part of what makes it so frustrating to figure out the rules. We have it in Assyria, we have it in Susa, we have it at Tel Bet Mirsim, at Halaf. This model of it was found at Knossos, and Arthur Evans suggested that it was like a board game with zones where you had a citadel, and one player starts at each wing, and kind of like the other game, you're trying to take over the other person's citadel. At Knossos, this was probably the box top on top of the box that held the gaming pieces. But I mean, these games belonged in the courts of kings, and it stands to reason that they also existed in a more common form in the local tavernas. And here's where that game is so far. He's obviously a placeholder, but I kind of love him. I really don't want to give him up at the end of the semester. And here are the disembodied arms again that you'll be playing with for this game. The kids are just wrapping up the semester, so I don't have more details on this at the moment, but those two games are ways to interact with the locals, have fun being insulted, have fun bragging, and build your clout. And of course, you can also have a song contest. And here's where Dr. Franklin's songs have come in so beautifully. Found a bunch of ancient texts on songs, and then we use Dr. Franklin's songs as the background with you. Choose a song about wisdom, a song about war, songs for sorrow, or songs for partying, and you click on one of these buttons to decide in which category you're going to compete. And of course, to win at this, again, it maps onto an ancient Greek reality, because musike, excelling there, is a chance to build your clout and build your kleos and define who you are. So our game designer, like I said, he's going to have this done in about a week. He keeps thinking about Dance Dance Revolution as his model for these arrows that come floating down. Here's just some examples, so you will pick from your texts songs of war from Archilochus, songs of sorrow from Anacreon, the party songs also from Anacreon. And so you'll have the oral experience of what that could have sounded like in terms of just the quality of the music. And then you have the chance to spend a little bit of time with the poetry and see what that felt like on this. And then we've got all these wisdom opportunities as well. There's probably about a dozen in each category. So there's a chance to keep playing and not have just the same poems repeat again and again and again. And then the last thing, in the ancient Greek world, tavernas actually were really significant places for the sharing of information. Some of our ancient historical accounts on the pirates in Cilicia in particular describe how they would hang out at the port and they would go to the tavernas and just listen. And they would listen to the conversations of people who just put into port and listen to see where they were headed and what they had on board and what their plans were and when they were taking off. And they'd help the pirates know when to seize upon them. The idea that you would be asking other people for information comes off this principle that, as you saw at the very beginning, this is a world without maps. And the way that you would move around on a long voyage is that you would come to a port, hire a guide who knew a certain zip code going up the coast a certain direction, and he would be with you then and be able to fill you in on the local rulers, the local customs, what they have for sale, all the information, where the currents run. And then when he gets to the end of the zip code where he knows anything, he'd get off your ship and you would hire someone new from that place. So the idea that part of your task when you come to port is to find out who knows what is naturally unfolding in the taverna. There's another example. I know you guys probably all know the Argonautica. Do you remember King Cyzicus in when the Argonauts get into the Propontis? He's useless. He's a great young king, but he knows nothing about what's coming before him on the journey. But poor Phineas, the blinded seer whose meals have been taken away from the Harpies for years, when the Argonauts save him, he tells them everything about what's coming. And it's perfect because he would actually have been located around this site, which is called Hieron, the sacred place, which is between the Propontis and the Black Sea. Hieron was a place for information gathering and for the posting of news in the form of inscriptions about who's got a treaty with whom in the area of the Black Sea. So as the Argonauts actually moved up the Propontis and into the Black Sea, they went through a place where historically, part of what you do is stop and gather information. So there is a nice correspondence to the historical reality here. But this is where the question comes, well, how do you get information? Well, you're in a taverna, and presumably your new best friend would like a little snack from the menu. And here, one of my absolutely terrific students from Emory who wanted to help with the game, but he wasn't a game programmer, went through Athenaeus de Gnusophytistae, which is the ultimate foodie book for the ancient world. And he collected all of these bits and pieces of information, which now constitute the menu. So you can do a conversation with the person from whom you'd like information. He says, well, I think I'd like a little something. I'd like a little something to eat. And then he quotes some of these wonderful things. Olives afford little nourishment and cause headaches. Black olives are bad for the stomach. Or, he's fouled his beard in the fish pickle. Or talking about the pina. Or not everyone can season a sea lizard nicely. So you get a sense of the local environment and culture. I mean, Athenaeus talks about every food in the world. We've got pages and pages of information on figs, on chickpeas, on different kinds of bread, and you get just a slice of it in the process of buying the information from this guy. And then the information you get, he's going to share information about how well connected the place is. The first question is about networks. And he says, he gives you his response. Each one of these is individualized to the city. And right now, because you start the game in Pegasi, our focus for this semester has been just these cities immediately up the coast and outside the area of where you set sail. Ultimately, we need to have this for all the cities in the place. They ask about, are there pirates around? And the person will give you the answer. And then tell me about the local stories. And this is where this other principle of the actuality of ancient Greek seafaring comes in, because if you read your ancient texts about Odysseus and about the Argonauts carefully, there's a certain cultural clout that you get when you put into a port that comes from knowing what the place is. The tales that you learn from these people you interview. This details about Alope, for example, talking about Poseidon, who fell in love with a girl, she bore him a child, and the mother abandoned him, and then the king rejected him and locked up his mother, etc., etc. These go into your captain's log. And then if, when you sail out of this town, you do go to that place, you've got it in your captain's log, and that turns into another bargaining chip with that all-important portmaster who's going to let you into the town or not. So there's a motivation for you to learn and use this stuff rather than just random extra information. Here's another just quick example, Philace, the people of Philace. They have absolutely no networks, but there's a very important cult there. And so you learn about Protesilaus of Philace, who was the first one to die at Troy. He'd been a suitor for the hand of Helen. His wife was so aggrieved by his passing that she built a bronze statue and gave it her full devotion. Her father had it destroyed and she threw herself into the fire. So you get these juicy bits and pieces. But as you go, you're gathering stories. And that is, in point of fact, a part of the way that this world worked. You'll also learn, for example, at this site about the grove of elm trees that mourned for Protesilaus when he died at Troy. So the degree to which people want to play slowly and dive into the poetry compared to the degree to which they want to just figure out how the game runs and when they're going with it, we've consciously tried to program a way that rewards you for taking time to slow down and let the stories kind of sink in. So with that, wrapping this up, sailing is a social matter. And safety at sea is a social matter. And in the ancient world, the myths and the rituals both authorized and enabled the way that you move successfully through the waters. We've got this amazing resource of epigraphic data for a framework of how people did come together, form connections, which would then hold them together in specific ways long after they left the shores of Samothrace. How they specifically chose to do that, we have provided a scratch of the surface of getting at the idea of telling stories, striking deals, competing with each other, invoking the gods. What we love about this is that with the games, we're trying to bring back the voices that were never recorded on the inscriptions when it comes to the granular quality of their lives. And I've referred a couple times in this chat to the idea that one of the big things about this is, as people play the game, the interesting thing for us is, do you start to think more like a Greek? Do you start to value more these social networks than you maybe automatically would have when you start to play the game? If we can track that, and we have various mechanisms for looking at that in the long run, that will go a long ways towards reaffirming the value of serious games when it comes to trying to understand the ancient world. This is a project with a really big team scattered over time. And here are their names at the bottom. And my fondest hope is that you go online and play the game. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Sandy, so much. My first question was going to be how, oh, are people there?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. My first question was going to be, how can people go and play test for you? But you've answered that. So thank you so much. It's such a fascinating social reality and kind of cultic practices and all the social reality that you're trying to model and put a human experiential face to the data is so fascinating. And I love all the variety of different source texts that you're using for flavor and also for biographical information, like the use of Theophrastus characters. Those, for students that don't know, those are little character sketches that describe little quirks of character that would provide motivations for doing certain actions. So I assume she's worked that in there as kind of the driving things for those characters. So I love the whole concept. It's amazing. My question is, when you design a game, every piece or subsystem that you add, introduces like a kind of mounting complexity. And have you found at different points along the way with the developing that, I want to get this piece in there, but then that like throws this one off, or it kind of outbalances this one, or, how are you juggling that, those different stages of development and all the ingredients you want to get in there?
That's the brilliant question. And I mean, I have learned so much doing this. My first game designer, like I said, was on it for about 3 years. And it's a game that evolves slowly because we are always relying on student volunteers. This is not a game with a big budget. This is people come and go, and Francis, you're nodding. Everybody's got a busy semester. And so what people are able to put into it varies from time to time. What we find is, I mean, Joanna Mundi and Joanna is amazing. She's as organized as I am not. And she has her PhD in art history from Emory, and she's also with Emory's Center for Digital Scholarship, and it would be impossible without them. But in terms of the evolution of the game, the biggest evolution, I think, was where Kevin Dressel and I had this conversation about a year ago. And we had the basic infrastructure of moving through space and your interactions in port so that you could actually get the wherewithal to buy a bigger ship or to put up a monument yourself or things like that. But the irony was that it was a network, but the humans were missing. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's where Kevin introduced me to the notion of the flavor text. And I mean, in part because you're all classicists, and it's wonderful to talk to classicists because you get excited about the texts themselves. As I said, the flavor texts, they're where I fell in love with the ancient worlds, and they can give you the sense of wonder. And yet for somebody in the gaming mode, you have to reward them for slowing down and absorbing it. That's the really big thing, because if it's not instrumentalized, it's going to slip away. So our big tick about last February was, we need to get the flavor text into this. If you take a look at the game, I mean, I could have showed you the gazillions of spreadsheets on this. For every single person in the game, for every pirate, for every crew member, there's a narrative that comes from the ancient world. And most of them, virtually all of them, have the ancient reference it comes from. So, an author here, an inscription there, a reference there, so that people, if they want to, can leap into it. We needed to keep it, though, so that you weren't leaping off into another website to get it. Because if you break that, you've lost the game. So focusing on the narratives was part of it. And then this larger idea, which another colleague at Emory has been emphasizing for me, of, do we see people change in their minds? We talk a lot right now, as I'm sure you know, in the field about the idea of, there's the emotional turn, the affective turn in the humanities, right? This concern for how the emotions really drive people. That's another place where we're hoping that these pieces of text that give you a sense of wonder can kind of kick in.
Yeah. Well, I know we have a lot of avid gamers in the audience, so I'd like people to maybe raise your hand or maybe just jump in with by unmuting. I don't know. maybe Sandy, you want to unshare your screen so we can see our talkers?
Sure.
Of course, you may want to be showing stuff too, but depending on the question.
Yeah, I think I've unshared, or did I not unshare?
Oh,
You did.
oh, okay, good. So
Right.
anybody want to ask a question?
I had one.
Yeah, Francis.
I was just wondering how, like, as you add more and more, do you plan to sort of like structure things chronologically? So like if I'm playing through, you know, obviously it takes time for me to go from one place to the other, and
Yeah.
events are happening, you know, a city state might rise or fall, you know, a war might start. So are there plans to sort of like as the game goes on, the price of something changes, and maybe if I'm like, if I leave a port with, you know, a ship full of wheat and wine,
Right.
thinking that the price is going to be, you know, whatever amount of drachmas, and then I pull into port and they say, no, a war started, wheat is now, you know, 5 times the price.
Yeah,
You
it's a
know,
great
that
question.
sort of dynamic world.
We at this point we don't have it calibrated, but the degree to which that map that you saw earlier on that shows greater and lesser degrees of things, because of the information flow problem, your only way of knowing, say, that you just bought a bunch of wheat, that the prices were actually down further along the road, would have been that you spoke with somebody who cued you onto that in terms of the taverna conversation. So part of our eagerness in getting the taverna in place would be to really emphasize, again, the social interactive quality being essential to really flourishing in this world. We have not put in like the big things like Alexander just died or something like that, because that would be a level of complexity beyond this. One of the really humbling things about game design is, because there are games like Assassin's Creed, right, which have got tens of millions of dollars in budget, right, and the capacity for multi-layering that, I mean, goes far beyond the 15 people over the last 7 years who worked with me. You know, it can be tempting to think about that as a desideratum. I've been really encouraged to see the extent to which there are in archeo games examples of very specific problem-oriented self-contained kinds of worlds. I mean, so that you can think about a game like a story problem almost. Roughly speaking, the framework is the 2nd century BC, and when we're looking for prices and polities, that's around the area we focus it. But the market thing is real. We've also tried specifically to get away from the Oregon Trail-y quality of it, because honestly, I mean, for the first couple of years, the only thing that was really in place was the trading. And I was going, this is really great, but it's like Oregon Trail. It's like, I wanted to get into something beyond that. Like, where's the gods at?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Julia.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. This is amazing, really fascinating. I had 2 questions. The first, to do with game mechanics. What is the, or is there an end point? I know you're going to gather your kleos and your money, but is there a goal you're working towards?
Yes, you want godhood. And it's funny because, again, when the game first began, it was like, we really, now you go from goatherd to god.
Spectacular.
And what I want more than anything, I know what I want more than anything else are the sound effects for goat, Jason, there you are. When the game first started out, again, one of my collaborators really wanted to be that you go trace the route of the Argonauts. And I was going, actually, that's not the point, because the whole thing about myth is that it's indeterminate. I've managed to sway that particular person's view substantially over the last couple of years, and now they get it. But you go very carefully with these things, right? I mean, John knows this. How often do people in our field really do a team project, right?
Right.
I mean, our field is the field of the canon, and all of you are classics majors because you are so good at reading these things and coming up with arguments and insights that you share with people, but the product is yours. And the engineering of this has made a real reliance on my convincing people sometimes, or not convincing them about something. So at this point, the goal is your kleos, is your cloudometer, to move that up. You can, at this point, you still can say, I want to be Jason and go get the golden fleece. But going for the golden fleece doesn't necessarily take you to the places where you're going to get the most up in terms of your kleos. And also because you lose, I mean, you need to buy the food to keep your men going, you need to get the water supplies, you need all those other things. It wouldn't necessarily take you in the richest pathways. So the goal really, as your godhood, really needs to be something articulated very clearly.
Right. That's a fascinating end goal. I love that.
Thanks. I mean, and of course, Jason so fails, right? It's like
the worst. The worst.
It's like, yes, Jason, you did not win the game. But again, that's part of what I love about this, because I mean, myth is about multiple possibilities. And that's part of what makes it such an appropriate human activity, right? Because what we want to know is, what if the story went a different direction? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that approach. I love how you articulate that as mapping onto gaming. I think I'd never thought about that, but it's so compelling.
It's wonderful. I mean, people who design games get this intuitively. I mean, oh gosh, Yarn Spinner is the program we've used for all these really complicated branching narratives with the telones. And it's terrific, but it's like one screenshot of that at a classics conference makes people go, oh, because of course we have the stemma where we got the text, right? Which is our branching thingamajigger, and it's like, and that gives like canon, and Yarn Spinner gives you the no. I don't think so. Yeah. Thanks. Good question.
Where did you have a question? Oh.
Okay. No.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, first, I just want to say I think it's really cool. And I actually think like the scale of the design, like if you look at a game, like you said, like Assassin's Creed, I think that the scale you're working at actually really appeals to me with this sort of subject matter, because it leaves more room for the player to sort of, in sort of the way that things are portrayed so simply, it kind of leaves more room for the player to build their own myth of sorts. But also, I was just wondering how you calculated the bargaining with the gods, sort of, because there was like a 22% chance. It seemed like a very complicated thing, maybe.
It really is. I mean, Joanna and I get together and go, all right, what's it going to be? I mean, my happy job with this is I am the token classicist, right? So I feel very Zeus-like, and it's fairly random in that regard, other than random compared with the fact that this is where I spend all my time. So, so if I thought about anything else over the last 10 years, it would be a different thing. But yeah, I mean, it has to all come down to 100%, right? And you want to steer away from things that fail to send the message that rituals matter. I mean, that's part of it. Because the way we're trying to program our players is to have a sensibility for what rituals get you, and a sensibility for what social networks get you, that may not have been natural to their way of thinking. So we tilt it slightly in that direction, but it's never a good idea to just like say, God, nah.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Yeah. It seems like a really difficult thing to kind of capture in like the very binary terms of, like literally binary terms of like a game. But
yes.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And it really reminds me of like the idea of being in network reminds me of like the American like healthcare system too. But that's pretty much, yeah, that's all. This is really cool. I'm not even like into classics. I'm a Chinese major, but I just wanted to show up to see what this was because it looked really neat.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so glad to hear. Well, and the binary quality, you've just put your finger right on it. I mean, it's stories versus spreadsheets in terms of digital humanities. Those who push back, and Francis, you're nodding like, yes, I know, right? I mean, there are those in our field, I know some of them, so does John, who really don't like all of this digital stuff because it's the end of the field, right? And they feel that you are necessarily reducing the open-endedness and the complexity and the beauty and the passion of it by reducing it to a spreadsheet. And the problem is how can you, with any kind of wisdom, overlook the tens of thousands of hours that an average American student has spent gaming by the time they walk down the aisle with their degree? I mean, it's this insanely lost opportunity. And when people are gaming, it's a free space, it's a creative space, it's a problem-solving space, it's a possibility space. I mean, much as I have resisted the idea of only going for the pedagogical side of this, because I really do believe in the data generation, on that pedagogical side, it's like, this is where you have some of people's most rapt attention when it comes to stories. And I just think as a field, we ignore that at our peril.
Yeah,
so they need to calm down about the spreadsheet thing.
Yeah, I would recommend, if you've ever heard of the game Dwarf Fortress, it's
no, I
a
haven't.
Game, but it's entirely text-based, essentially, very graphically limited, but it's entirely based around the concept of myth building. So you like run a dwarf colony essentially, and it goes very in depth with every like dwarf getting their own like history, and the goal of the game is really more the experience of like experiencing the myths and it just, I don't know, you might want to just like check that out because it might have some really good, it's different than this obviously, but yeah, that's all. But yeah, thank you so much.
That's awesome. There's one of the earliest games based in antiquity was Hammurabi. It was like 1968. It was like green letters on a black screen, but it's hilarious. And it's based off of Mesopotamian texts about managing the kingdom. But I mean, you get to your Hammurabi and then you have an advisor. And my favorite line is Your Royal Highness, you have been declared official Fink because you've bankrupted the people. The empire's falling apart. But it's like, but the delight in just engaging with the text is something that I think needs to be recognized in these games. And again, for a field that knows how to fall in love with text like we have, it's a great exercise.
I was gonna ask if someone wanted to get involved in like helping produce it, like how would we go about doing that?
Email me.
Can I interject here? Do your students get credit for this?
You know, the short answer is no. I mean, the students at Kennesaw, we are collaborating with two faculty. Kennesaw State University has an undergraduate program in computer animation. And because I have never in my life gotten funding for this from a classics funding organization, never. Do I sound bitter? I'm a little bitter. But at Kennesaw State, so their students, they're in a class, and then Joanna and I come in and do the presentation, and like the disembodied arms of this semester and the game playing. That's one student's work. But students at Emory, they just volunteer when they want to keep in touch with the classics. But I would be, Tori, so happy to have you come volunteer. One of the things we truly, really need are people to do playthroughs. People just play the game. I mean, at this point, the most recent things aren't all up and loaded because we're debugging it. But we are on the verge, we hope, of having that done. And I would absolutely love playthroughs or anything that you'd like to work on. I mean, I think our next big, well, we have a couple of things in the offing. One is we really need students to help us develop a guide. Because you know, it's like playing the game, what works best, what are your strategies, what do you find? And also, we're trying to develop a Codabos game, just because we can. So collection of texts and things like that. I would absolutely love you guys to hop on and volunteer.
Would it be okay if we gave them credit on our end for?
Absolutely, yeah, I'd be happy to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because Joanna, gosh, we meet every week with the Kennesaw students. What's the best line we had coming out of that? Oh yeah, last week it was, I lost the sun. I can't find the sun. The sun is just, I love this. I love this project. It's like, it's an add-on for me, but I love it because in what other class do you get to say the sun is missing? But I would love to work with you on that. That would be great. And we can think about ways to make it really work with your curriculum and what you've got going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Other questions?
Can you become a pirate?
You know, this is what I really, really, really want. At this point, we've only got a program for Jason, but my goal is that you can also play a pirate, because pirates are just the name you give to the other team, right? I mean, that's all there is. And like the Aetolian pirates had, as you may know, they were spectacularly well connected. And they also had one of the best proximity networks in the ancient Mediterranean, precisely because everybody wants to be your friend when you have the biggest gun. Mm-hmm. It just works that way. And I think getting to the point of being able to choose roles would be wonderful. And I mean, the another thing about the game is at this point, there's no chance to be anything but male. And I would really like for people to be able to be Queen Tuta. Do you know about a Queen Tuta? The queen of the Illyrians? She's the best, because her people were really good at piracy, and it was just a habit they had, and they were never not practicing piracy. And of course, Romans found that irritating. And we have her letter to the Romans saying, "You ask me to prevent my people from doing the thing that is natural to them. We won't stop." It's like, I've got to give every woman who wants to the chance to play Queen Tuta. Precisely because, I mean, among the quotations that the telones, who, as you can tell, we were just in a mood when we got to the telones. It's like, this guy is horrible. But he may say to you, "Oh, you're a pirate. You're the bravest of men. Every city welcomes you," because it's true. I mean, piracy was good for business. And that would be such a shot in the arm to foreground in the idea that hero schmiro, what we're looking at is mobility, clout, recognizability, your name lasting, access to resources, a good cultural memory of every place you come to. So I just need another half a dozen programmers. Kevin, who took over, my first programmer went back to graduate school, and so now has a real job in graduate school. But Kevin, who's been doing all of our programming and updates, he does this completely pro bono. And that's extraordinary, because it's a lot of work.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question.
Yes.
So my partner is actually wondering if your program is open source, can others contribute and
yes.
go to it?
Tell your partner, that's an absolutely great question. So everything we have is on GitHub. And we've done that in part because we're really interested in letting students in various classes. I mean, John, this would be another way if you've got people in a computer design department. The entire program itself is on GitHub, and you contact Joanna and I, and we give you access, and then you can download the whole thing and mod it, do what you want, make additions, play with the programming itself without doing any damage to the thing as it is. We've had people, even in data science classes, we've had them play with the Samothracian epigraphic network data and model it through programs other than Gephi. So, and that's also on GitHub. So everything we've got is available and accessible. And then the game itself, I should say, is Unity software. So it's if anybody designs games for fun, there's a good chance that they're designing with Unity. It's a pretty accessible, user-friendly program.
I like how the game itself is a multi-form entity, not just the narratives in the game.
Oh, it is. It is. Yeah, canon. everything's sliding. And truthfully, in terms of the longer outlook of the game, what I really love about this is the chance to say, this is a big sandbox for playing in, to kind of push the edges about what are some things we'd like to ask ourselves about how we could grab this whole idea of gaming as a way to think about the world and think about our field.
He's just wondering if you could post the link to the GitHub.
You know something, if you could drop me an email, then I can I have to process it through Emory's little thumbs up system. So, so you just drop me an email And we'd love to have you do that. That'll be fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. One of the great truths of digital humanities is when you've built these stinking databases, you want everybody to use them. Because it really is bloodless. And that's the difference, right? I mean, in terms of digital humanities for antiquity, everything is curated. I mean, every line of every inscription can be contested. And so the longevity of the effort to put it in place is really significant. And I had no graduate students who were saying, let me. So you learn a lot.
Well, we should maybe let you go and I don't know, have some dinner or something. But last call for questions. Okay. Well, Goodrich Club, thanks for hosting again. We really appreciate it when you host these talks because it really gets out there to a lot of interesting people. And Sandy, thanks so much for taking time to come and
Absolutely,
talk
this was
to us.
fun.
Yeah, and you know, you could probably expect a number of people to get in touch with you about different things.
Perfect. That would be awesome. And I saw that you've got the link to the Scholar blog in the chat. That's great. Absolutely, play the game and do contact me. I would be more than happy to chat with anybody and have you hop in. So it was really nice to meet y'all.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Marcia, are you wanting to stay on the meeting after?
I can if people want to talk about anything or if you and I want to discuss stuff, so I can hang around for a sec.
Okay, I can stay around. I wasn't sure if I quit, would it quit it for everybody?
I don't think so. I'm unsure though.
Okay, but in case you had more Goodrich meeting you wanted to conduct.
I think we covered everything we wanted to announce at the beginning.
Okay. Do you have any kind of activist stuff you wanted to touch in about? Or anybody, or you know?
I do.
Hello.
Hi. So the UVM Union of Students has a Google Docs petition going around. I've put it in a few class chats. You need to be a UVM student to sign it. You need to put in your UVM email. So yeah, do that. There's an email, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, from a professor in the English department. I don't remember her name, unfortunately, but
Nancy Welch, maybe?
yes. That, and there's a Facebook group that she's linked in that email, UVM Against Cuts, something like that.
Yeah, I think I received the same email that you're talking about, and I copy pasted the whole linked section of that email in the Goodrich email that went out earlier today. So if anybody needs to look at it from there, it's available via the Goodrich email.
Perfect. I
don't
don't
see the
letter. Oh, sorry.
I said I don't see the petition. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I did write a letter. I got a response from the dean, got a response from the provost office. Very vague, not the kind of answer I was hoping for. So we really have to show up and kick their ass.
That's true, because the letters, they'll just go, like, even the letter to the president goes to president at UVM, they can just delete them all. They'll have they'll draft their response and they'll have their admin just answer. That's it, man. It's just a closed door. I mean, if you go to their wing, maybe that's a different story.
Didn't you say a couple of years ago when you presented that petition with 1,300 signatures that the provost just kind of laughed at you and said, "Of course, classicists like classics."
Right. This is meaningless. This has no bearing on our finances. And all these, we had 1,300 some classics people from all around the world had signed a petition, and they just laughed it off, just shrugged it off. It took a lot of work to get those, get all those signatures.
What about alumni, classics alumni? Could we get a hold of everyone who's ever graduated that's still alive?
Yes.
And have them, possibly write in support?
So we did this 2 years ago. I got a list of over 1,000 alums in history and classics, both from the alumni office, and sent out an appeal saying, please write letters of protest. and it led to just a shitstorm on campus. Eventually, it involved a lot of like Rachel was around, a few other people were around and remember this. It involved a lot of other protests by other groups too on campus, but eventually the provost did resign. But then we got these new people, and they're just doing the exact same thing. The board of trustees, I guess, has certain priorities. But yeah, it wouldn't hurt. I could send you, or who would be the person among you to send the list of those alums to? I got in big trouble for sending that letter out because I'm technically in the administration, so they didn't like the idea of me asking people to complain against the administration. But if somebody else sent it out, that would be okay.
I'd be happy to. If that works. The other thing is, I'd say hit them where it counts. What they care about is reputation and alumni and giving. And if the letter says, "I'll never give another penny to UVM," you know, I'm telling people to avoid UVM like the plague. I'm sorry, that's what we need to.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. It sounds horrible, but I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, if anybody
Hear about a letter of support that says we're great.
Yeah, on that same note, if anybody is in contact with like high schoolers, especially juniors and seniors who might be looking to attend UVM, have them write letters to the presidents and the provosts and stuff saying, I'm not going to attend if you don't fix this or come to some form of compromise. Or because the really stupid thing is that there are so many people who are still really interested in this era of history and this area of study that to get rid of it completely is mind-boggling. Like, I don't understand. And maybe I'm just being naive and young in that regard, but
I did post a link to one of the petitions in the chat. If you want to go sign that, follow it, whatever, that's in the chat as well.
I will also send out that petition link that you provided as like a reply to the email I sent out earlier. So that's just with all the other links. Because once the Zoom is closed, everything in the chat kind of disappears. So I did also copy the link that was provided to the game, and I'll pass that around as well. So
I recommend people write more to publications too. The Digger was very receptive. They got back to me very, very quickly, and
you already have an article published with a letter. It's spectacular.
I saw it. Professor Usher just emailed me about it too. So did Professor Chu. So
Professor Chu wanted me to say hi to everyone. I mean, most people have gone now, but she wanted me to say hi and that she misses everyone and that she misses baking for us and that she wants us all to email the SGA and Peter Lally in the SGA and offer our support and, email the dean, send letters to the dean, all that kind of stuff.
John, in class on Wednesday, you were talking about how that number they cited for under 5 students graduating and count the double majors.
I think that's the case because the number is off from what I know it to be. So I think that's probably what they did.
What do we? Could you send me the actual numbers for that? Because the Forbes are cited that number, and I thought it would be fun to send them a correction.
Okay, yeah, I'll dig up that information.
Hey, John, do you know how they count first and second majors?
That's what I wasn't sure. That's the point Rachel was mentioning. Because
well, what I wonder is if you have 2 majors, some of you might, and you declared one first, and then you declared the other one, is it just temporal? Because if it is, then you could drop the first one,
add the second
and then re-add it, and suddenly you have a different first one maybe. There's got to be some way they decide which is a first major versus a second major.
Well, yeah, I wrote to the dean to ask how he's deciding that, and he has not written back. He doesn't want to give that information away.
In terms of also being incredibly annoying, this probably won't work, but I was like, I'm in quarantine right now because I went home for Thanksgiving. But once I'm out of quarantine, I want to buy a whole bunch of chalk and recruit a whole bunch of people to just write like not necessarily rude things inspired by ancient graffiti, but I just want to write on all the sidewalks on like central campus stuff about not doing this. But I don't think that's very effective. So if people have other really annoying protesty things in mind, or even like a virtual protest,
I have one that I'd like to push, like either through T-shirts or sandwich boards or sidewalk graffiti, which is a goof on the university motto, which is Studi Eis et Rebus and Estis. I'd like to push Stultiti Eis et Rebus and Festis, which roughly translates as a foolish, sneaky business, capitals, which is kind of a good description of UVM right now. Business,
Could you
foolish, sneaky.
send that in
Sure.
the Zoom chat so I could copy it down so I don't forget it or misspell it?
Please do.
What did you mention? You sent me an email too that people had done something with the president's wing. They had like stormed it or something.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, Black Lives Matter, they stormed it. They didn't get into the actual offices. There were some cops out, but they filled the hall like repeatedly, like on a number of occasions during the semester. And they eventually got some building names changed and some other concessions.
The difficulty with trying to organize this sort of thing now is that people are worried about COVID and the spike. A lot of people are at home now. There aren't very many people on campus or nearby to really be annoying with a large crowd and large numbers. So I tried to Google like virtual protests and how somebody could do that, but I'm unsure still.
Yeah.
Our protest?
Oh yeah, we could drive past his house and honk a whole bunch.
One thing I thought was that I don't know if the administration really pays a lot of attention to this, but we could have our friends and our friends of our friends and whatnot add on classics majors or minors, just temporarily. They don't have to actually major or minor in classics, even though they should. But add them on, drop it, add it on, drop it, add and drop it. Make it look like there's
Yeah,
support.
I think that's a great idea. It's the kind of thing if we could be in person, but if you could stand outside and just talk to every person going by, just for the prank of it, people would probably do it just for fun, even if they didn't care. So I
was thinking something we could do for an in-person protest that wouldn't require there to be a large group of people is, remember when we did Oktoberfest and people read it and you just needed to have one person there at all times reading something? So we could loudly and annoyingly just read something near the president's offices all day.
We were thinking Dante's Inferno.
I was thinking Dante's Inferno, particularly the section about, the punishments of the avaricious, and
replace some of Dante's allusions with allusions of our own to the president.
Replace some of the names.
Get in contact with the airbase, tell them to just fly the jets by as loudly as possible multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is you have to be disruptive in the protest, but, of course, peaceful and civil as well, but it needs to be difficult for them to just ignore, and being loud is one of a way to do that. Right. I'd personally be willing to come to Vermont to do it. Tori, our apartment's under construction, right? I could sleep in your floor. You'd allow that?
Well, our apartment's only under construction for the next week and a half, so,
Yeah.
I have a spare room in my apartment as well.
Yeah.
So that's also an option if you want to be closer to Burlington.
Yeah, either way,
but
I'm good. I don't know if anyone wants me there from Massachusetts, because don't look at our numbers for today.
You're welcome to come sleep on my floor, Megan, but that's if you want to be out in the boonies of Isle Lamont with little to no internet connection.
You live on Isle Lamont? What an amazing place to live.
That's why my connection is spotty at best here. I'm actually reaching out to a couple of the teachers from my high school, because I know that quite a few of them went to UVM, and one of my favorite teachers from high school wanted to major in class, but he didn't think he'd get with it, so he didn't. Whatever. But I'm asking them to talk to the high school students at MVU and see if they would write letters and be like, we're not going to apply to UVM if you don't, stop with this. So we'll see if that works.
That's a really good idea. I might contact my high school Latin teacher and bring it up.
Yeah. I'm thinking especially since a lot of MVU students, Vermont high school students, go to UVM. There's 12 students just from my class alone from Swanton that ended up coming to UVM. So I think that threatening the in-state student population might help.
And do we have all the lists of everybody who's attended those Latin days, which I know had to be canceled this?
Yeah. So that's the Vermont Classical Language Association. So I wrote to them, and they're working on a letter that all the teachers will sign. And I asked them if they would also get all their Latin students to sign. So that could be in the neighborhood of 500 or 600 people. Frau, that was directing the play last year, taught German at BHS, called today, and she's going to have the German students at BHS write and, threaten not to come. Of course, it would be nice if they actually would come and major in German. Then we wouldn't be having these problems.
Yeah.
I was going to come, but you're getting rid of it, so I'm not even going to consider it anymore.
Yeah.
I would love to email people from like CVU. That's a big taker for UVM. Email Magister Morton.
Yeah, I wish Pennsylvania like contributed more students and I could be just as effective in writing my hometown, but no.
We have a few UVM students, even though I'm an out-of-stater, that we have a fair number of people who came here from Littleton, so and we have a Latin program that is offered from middle to high school, so it's worth, bringing it up.
I don't know how helpful it is, but it's very interesting that Phil Ambrose tells me that when he came here in 1952, there were 2 Greek majors. And the number, it's not like classics is still hanging on. We've never had such huge high enrollments, but there has been a commitment to the value that is just
that's what's changed.
Yeah, I was thinking about, like in Buddhism, like the populace when the Buddha was, going around India, there you don't have a very small number of monks, but the population supported them. They went around with their begging bowls, and they were fed because they knew that even though they weren't going to do it as householders, that it supported the very foundations and values of their society.
Yeah. Well, public begging that you suggested could be a good public shaming. Like if you had a big Kickstarter, like save UVM Classics, trying to raise $10 million. But you'll never reach it. But you could get, you could make it embarrassing.
We could even rope more of the departments that are being threatened into the Kickstarter too, because Megan and Henry and I, we've been talking about this for a while, and we all agree that like we can't just focus on ourselves now, even though we are definitely being threatened. There's so much more that it's going to be more effective if we can sort of stick together and help protect each other. So.
Yeah. Well, and also consider the numbers that were in the letter. So they're saving maybe as much as $800,000 with these cuts, but the budget shortfall is $8 million. So think how much more they're going to have to cut to get there.
Yeah.
There's not going to be anything left of the place.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Did you say you were going to do a Kickstarter site, or?
I mean, it's just I don't know.
Something really. And we could make like a video. Everybody could or various people could record sections of sort of like a YouTube that you could play on it about the values, or what it's meant, to you or the world or the nation or whatever.
We could pull a Diogenes and go beg the Iron Allen statue for some money.
You put go around and put togas on statues.
Yeah, or go around with a light looking for an honest administrator.
Another thing somebody can consider doing is some of the veterans did this last year when they cut the veterans course that we used to do, was they went all the way down to the governor's office and they got in there and made a big emotional fuss. And he called up the President Sullivan and said, I got what the hell's going on up there, Sully? I got vets breaking down in my office here. So if you a dozen of you went down there and got a meeting, and I don't know, they could wave their wand and find some one-time appropriation or something. I don't know. It's bad.
So that temptation, this one I don't know is feasible because of COVID, but my temptation was to do a testudo formation near because that's what Walsh taught us how to do in Latin days. So I thought it was appropriate, but COVID would make that hard.
Something that reminded me of actually is I know that there's an archaeology professor that UVM sometimes hires on to lecture, 1 or 2 classes a semester, Jess Robinson, who's actually the head, the state archaeologist. And I'm sure he would have some kind of vested interest in this. So I could possibly reach out to him in Montpelier and see if he would be willing to help out in any way. I'd love Jess, so I'm sure he would be, if he has any time at all, I'm sure he'd be willing to put some towards this. I also just had an anthropology major friend who's not part of the classics at all. She just texted me and was like, what can I do to help out the classics? Let me know what I can do. So that was nice to hear.
Well, if anyone is thinking of doing any small, like, in-person things here in Vermont, I'd be happy to print shirts that has that motto that Franklin said.
Yeah.
For people to
be
wear.
happy to pay for all the we'll pay for all the materials and everything.
I have a
I
Redbubble.
mean, we got to spend our money, but you know, we have money. We're gonna go out of business, and it's gonna be left over.
Something perhaps that could also be done. I have a Redbubble account, so maybe Annalise and we could collaborate on the t-shirts, and I could post it to my Redbubble account and sort of spread that link around, and maybe use whatever money is gotten from the t-shirts and donate it wherever it needs to go, depending on how many we sell. I only get like 30 cents a sale because of profit margins, but you know, everything helps. So then you wouldn't even have to worry too much about like paying for the printing, because every Redbubble takes care of printing and shipping and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
we make it easy.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that Weirdest Mountains reminded me of Weirdest. Maybe you could get the Weirdest Mountains in there somewhere.
Yeah, keep Vermont weirdest.
Yeah.
All right. It's getting kind of late, and I don't think I'll be able to sleep for a while yet because I'm once again filled with rebellious vigor, but I've got work to do.
Yeah.
Writing a letter will put you to sleep, so do that.
Luck with everything, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.